I am going to ask Jude if she would like to say anything really quickly before we get started.
Okay, I think I'm here now, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to speak at these sessions, Sheyanne. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to talking about twice exceptional students. You'll have to excuse the bumpy conversation I'm having. We're just driving through Missouri right now on the way back to Florida. But, you know, I'm really looking forward to talking to all of you and sharing information about twice exceptional students.
Thank you. So next week, make sure to register for that to hear Jude talk about twice exceptionality, which is her area of research. So we will be doing that next week. So today I have with me Lindsee Fryatt from the Nebraska MTSS team, and we're going to be talking about high ability learning, social emotional behavioral learning, and how this all works together in an MTSS framework.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Sheyanne. Thanks for introducing me. Like she said, my name is Lindsee Fryatt, and I am with Nebraska MTSS. I serve regions 1 and 2, which is ESUs 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 18 and 19. And so we provide MTSS implementation support to those areas, and we actually provide that all across the state. Later, I'll show a map of kind of how we're all spread out throughout the state. But we provide that support across the state, and part of what we do is regarding social emotional behavioral learning. So I was super excited to partner with Sheyanne today to talk about this, because this is certainly a passion of mine. My background is I'm a mental health practitioner, and I was a school social worker before, and an MTSS building coordinator. So this is certainly where my heart lies, so I'm excited to talk about this today with all of you. So we're going to talk about social, emotional, and behavioral learning, specifically as it relates to high ability learners. We're going to talk about typical characteristics of high ability learners. We're going to connect that to the 5 core competencies of social, emotional, and behavioral learning, and I'll connect all of those under a multi-tiered system of support. We're also going to talk about some strategies to support the social, emotional, and behavioral development of specifically high ability learners.
So as I was doing research for this presentation, I came across this quote, which I thought was really great and really highlights that gifted students do have different SEL needs based on their divergent abilities from their same age peers, because they have this development of emotions that and cognition that may be different from their physical age or their development. They have these unique thoughts and emotions that differ from those around them, and they perceive the world just a little bit differently. Some perceive the world more intensely, some perceive the world as, you know, not as intensely. Like underachievers tend to perceive the world more kind of relaxed in a way, but they have this whole spectrum of emotions and different things that they have that differ from their peers. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about high ability learners as a group. So if we look at definitions of high ability learners, written in Rule 3 by Nebraska, is that top definition, kind of just outlining the high ability learners are one who show evidence that they have capability above their grade level for intellectual, creative, or artistic capacities, and they require some kind of accelerated curriculum. So that's the Nebraska definition, but if we look at the definition from the National Association for Gifted Children, they really highlight the potential for high ability learning or for giftedness. So when the NAGC talks about recognizing potential, that means not necessarily recognizing a certain test score, but recognizing, could this child perform at a higher level given the opportunity? And so looking for potential is equally as important as looking for achievement, so that those students are able to actualize on that. So some possible characteristics, these don't apply to all gifted students because they are all really unique, but some possibilities for characteristics that differ are they learn really quickly and with relative ease, and you can see that really prevalently in the classroom. Most of the time they're verbally proficient and can have conversations and use vocabulary high above their age level. They prefer relationships with older children and adults because that's where they find stimulating conversation. They a lot of times have unusual imaginations because some of them have that creative giftedness, or they have an imaginational overexcitability, and they have that really exceptionally creative imagination. It's also usually really in depth. They, again, absorb knowledge really easily. They have a deep interest in single areas. They're usually pretty creative, good problem solvers. Gifted students display a lot of sympathy and sensitivity, empathy, and a strong sense of justice. Very curious. They think outside of the box. And then we also have twice exceptionalism, which is when a student is identified as gifted, but also has some kind of other diagnosed disability, such as autism, ADHD. It could be a physical disability. And so those are all kind of these characteristics that those students are exhibiting. And if we look at characteristics that are also exhibited, but can sometimes be seen as a behavioral issue instead of a manifestation of giftedness, some of these children are screened out of high ability learning programs because they are seen as a behavioral issue. So for example, gifted students may become bored with the general education curriculum and refuse to do their homework or their work because they think there's no point to it and they've already learned it, so they shouldn't have to do it. And this can result in low grades as well. They often have difficulty changing topics. Once they're really engrossed in a topic, it is hard to get them to switch off of it. They display impatience with their peers frequently because a lot of times their peers don't think on the same level as they are, or they're not picking things up as fast as they are, so they become quite impatient with that. Those are the kids that also question adult direction, and it's not because they're being insubordinate, but because they truly wonder why they're doing what they're doing, and they always have to have that why behind it. They need stimulation frequently. Again, they're emotionally sensitive and can have a difficult time with authority or kind of have dominating behaviors in peer groups because they are perceiving themselves as always correct or as superior sometimes to others. They are the ones that will follow you around the classroom and talk your ear off because they are not getting that kind of intellectual stimulation from their peers that they are seeking. So they a lot of times walk around and talk to the teacher. They can display perfectionism, and we will talk later about when perfectionism becomes an issue in the classroom. And then they develop asynchronously, which means that they can cognitively understand things that they're not emotionally ready for. And so while a child may cognitively be able to read or listen to all those horrible things going on in the news, they're emotionally not ready for that. And so they become frustrated not understanding things that they're not emotionally ready for.
Right. One thing I just wanted to note, I realized I forgot to say in the learning objectives, but as we got started, if you have questions, please feel free to drop those into the chat. We'll be checking the chat occasionally. So if any questions you have come up throughout our time here today, feel free to drop those into the chat and we'll get to them at some point. If not throughout, definitely at the end. So I just
and I have Adam Larson is watching the chat for me, so he will stop us if he sees a question that is relevant to what we're
Excellent. Thank you. I realized I forgot to say my part on that. So thank you, Sheyanne. So typically when we talk about high ability learners, we focus primarily on traditional intelligence. Today, we're really talking about that emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage our own emotions, and to recognize, understand, and respond to the emotions of others. In looking at fostering emotional intelligence, we'll focus on social, emotional, and behavioral learning today. And this is particularly important as we consider the things that Sheyanne just talked about in the previous slides, that high ability learners may be likely to have asynchronous development, meaning their emotional development may lag behind their intellectual development, and they may be at an increased risk for mental health challenges due to the uniqueness of their needs and the expectations and demands they place upon themselves. So we really want to ensure that we are appropriately identifying and addressing the needs of these students, particularly not forgetting about their emotional intelligence through a system of problem solving. So any social, emotional, and behavioral concerns present in all of our students, we want to address through problem solving, but particularly the emotional intelligence of our high ability learners. This is a system we hope to have in place. We are available to help make sure those systems are in place to make sure that we're meeting the needs of the students in your districts so that we can really maximize the success of all students, but particularly as today as we discuss high ability learners.
So as we talked about those unique characteristics for high ability learners, it creates a set of affective needs that are also unique. And if we don't meet those affective needs, there are different school-based things that can cause issues not only personally, but for the classroom environment as well. So one of the really big things that we see with unmet affective needs is underachievement. So underachievement is when students have a discrepancy between the potential for achievement and their outcomes in school. So they score really high on a test and we know they're really smart, but they're not getting the grades that we know that they're capable of getting. And this can be from boredom or lack of motivation, or a plethora of different things cause underachievement, but that is something that needs to be addressed in the affective realm. They can develop a negative attitude towards school, especially if they perceive themselves to be bored or not belonging or kind of othered from other students. That creates kind of that negative attitude and a lot of times fear to go to school or dread going to school. It can cause disruptive behavior, especially if the kids are bored. If you've got that kid who finishes their work super early and they've got idle hands, that can cause super disruptive behavior. Sometimes because of their own pressure and sometimes from outside pressures from the gifted label, they can develop neurotic perfectionism where they have such a high expectation of themselves and perfection that it is not attainable. It keeps moving higher. It's a moving target and it becomes unattainable. And a lot of times they'll shut down, or sometimes gifted kids even have a hard time starting an assignment because they're so afraid that it won't be perfect that they don't even start. Sometimes they can have an unclear sense of identity, again, especially if they feel like they don't belong in the classroom or if they're not interacting with peers that they feel as they can connect with. Poor self-concept and low self-esteem come with this as well, especially if they're underachieving gifted students, or especially if they are not being not given the chance to socialize or not given the chance to reflect upon their own performance in a positive way. So those are all things that can be remedied within the school day with some interventions.
So when we think about those things that Sheyanne just discussed, underachievement, negative attitudes, not wanting to come to school, disruptive behavior, all of those things, neurotic perfectionism, all of those unique needs and challenges that high ability learners face, put them at risk, a possible risk for mental health concerns. Some researchers found that gifted students are not at any more of an increased risk for mental health problems than their peers, but other research has shown that there's a difference. So what some of the research just says that about 10% of gifted adolescents experience clinically significant levels of depression. So 10% of our gifted students may have signs of depression. On the flip side, 17% of all of our young people, ages 6 to 17, experience a mental health disorder. And we know about half of those develop by the time kids are 14 years old. So by the time they're in our high school setting or late middle school, they're developing those mental health disorders if they're going to have one. About half of all children receive services for a mental health condition when they have one. So only about half of the kids get help for those. And 70 to 80% of those services are obtained in the school setting. So it's a huge opportunity for us to meet the needs of kids with mental health concerns. And if the research is mixed, we still know that those implications above that we talked about before, for any child would place them at an increased risk for a mental health concern. Especially when we consider, I know it's probably harping on something you hear everywhere you go, but in today's society, what we're facing with COVID-19, social isolation, the different academic expectations and academic challenges that we're facing right now, we know that we really have to put those supports in place for all of our students, and as we talk today about high ability learners. School is the primary place to support those students. So that's why it's really critical that we develop those systems through a system of problem solving, and that we have SEBL systems in place to support the needs of our kiddos.
So some other mental health considerations when we're talking about meeting the needs of HAL students, they have those affective characteristics that we said may exacerbate tendencies towards depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation, other mental health disorders. Things like the neurotic perfectionism can cause students to slip into that anxiety depression realm. They're hypersensitive, and so because they perceive the world around them so intensely and so So personally, a lot of times they can also be susceptible for those mental health disorders. Social isolation is also another one we know from the research that is a really big deal for gifted students. Most of the time in the classroom, especially if they're the only gifted student in their class, because they're perceptive, they know that they're different from the others and they can't find anything to talk to their friends about, or they can't relate to the other students, or they feel like the other students know they're different. And so that causes this social isolation, which again is not good for mental health. They can oftentimes have sensory overexcitability. And so they either need time to withdraw from sensory objects, or they need time there, or they need sensory objects on one side or the other. These can cause extreme anxiety, especially if they're in a classroom or a situation where they feel like they can't withdraw from the situation and get that quiet or lack of stimulation they need, or if they're lacking that need for physical stimulation and they're not receiving that can cause a lot of anxiety in those students, which causes like a lot of that excessive movement that can be distracting and all those different kinds of things. And then, as we know, poor self-esteem can cause all of the above mental health disorders, and it's something that is prevalent in all students, but for gifted students it comes most prevalently when the students are tying their giftedness to their identity. And so if they do poorly on an assignment, they think that they are doing poor as a person. And so that's something that is really prevalent among gifted students. And if we take steps in schools to work towards that multi-tiered framework, we can kind of work as a mediator or a preventative factor against having to go to counseling or have medication or those different things that come with mental health disorders.
Yeah. Yeah, that one goes to.
Now we're going to chat a little bit about social, emotional, and behavioral learning.
Our screening.
And how, let's see, I'm going to.
Yeah, is there a way to mute?
I think there's a way to mute everyone. Really quickly, I'm going to ask just that we check to make sure you're muted. And I hit the mute all button. There we go. All right. So now we're going to take some time to talk about social, emotional, and behavioral learning. So social and emotional learning is defined by CASEL, the Collaborative for Social and Emotional Learning, which is really the expert in the field, one of the experts in the field of SEL. And it's defined as the way that children and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, attitudes, and skills for managing and regulating their emotions, for goal setting, for showing and feeling empathy for others, building and maintaining relationships, and making responsible decisions. The goal is to prepare students for long-term success in life and really to become responsible members of our society. And so we talk about, you've probably heard SEL, but you've also heard me today talk about SEBL. So on the next slide, we have a little bit of an image as to why we started using the term SEBL through Nebraska MTSS, because we really wanted the frameworks of SEL and behavior, so whether that's PBIS or whatever other framework you use, to be interconnected. We wanted them to really complement and partner with one another and not work in silos, because they really are foundational for one another. So throughout our time, you'll primarily hear me reference SEBL. This is intentional. Some of the literature that we use still references SEL, but in Nebraska, through Nebraska MTSS, we're combining that behavior piece really to focus on fostering those skills, behavior skills, emotion regulation skills that create the safe and supportive environments where children can have the emotion regulation and the empathy and relationship skills that will really make them available to have those positive behavioral outcomes. So that's really our rationale for kind of molding those together. So SEBL is critical to academics. We know that it provides a foundation that makes students mentally and emotionally available to learn the academic content that we put in front of them. This is really important when we consider it for our high ability learners. The fostering of these essential skills when we think about asynchronous development, and not even with asynchronous development, just those unique challenges that they face because they are gifted or high ability learners. We really want to foster this essential set of skills that will make them available emotionally and mentally to the academic rigor that we really want to present them with, so that they can have those optimum outcomes. We really focus on 5 competencies, and these are adapted from CASEL. Again, you'll hear me reference CASEL a lot. They're across the settings of classrooms, schools, homes, communities, and we really look at them from a perspective of both student development, but also from adult mastery. So in other trainings or presentations that we speak about SEBL, we really focus on adult development as well. Because we have to master these skills in ourselves before we can really expect or appropriately model them for the young people that we serve and the young adults that we serve. So when we dive deeper into SEBL, we really take a look at that adult component. Today we're talking about student SEBL, but the competencies are the same across for adults or young people, and they're also the same across different environments and across the lifespan. So we have self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. And we're going to go through each of those real briefly next. So self-awareness is the ability to recognize our thoughts, emotions, and core beliefs and values. This is developing social emotional insight and self-reflection. It's really learning about ourselves. What do I believe? How do I feel? How do I express how I feel? What do I value? What are my strengths? What are my challenges? How do I develop a growth mindset? What am I interested in? And these are really critical to peer engagement. So we have to know about ourselves and how to have an awareness of self to connect with our peers and relate to our peers and handle interaction and communication and conflict with our peers. Moving beyond just an awareness of ourselves, right? So then the next thing we want is to move beyond just knowing and caring and thinking about ourselves and into thinking about managing ourselves. So we want to have more of a self-management of our emotions, our thoughts, and our behaviors. We really focus in on how our emotions and our behavior impacts other people, and we work towards regulating those in this competency. This is where we see impulse control, motivation and goal setting, stress management. One thing I really want to note here when we think about self-management, this is really important in regard to high ability students, because when we have those high academic expectations and they have those high expectations for themselves, coupled with they may be in AP courses, they may have different adjustments to their curriculum or the content that they're looking at, and then we may pull them to attend specialty seminars, things like that, and then they're tasked with catching back up with the missed work that they missed while they got to attend a really cool seminar, things like that. We may be unintentionally contributing to some of those difficulties that we've talked about that students face related to stress and anxiety from the pressures they put upon themselves, and that we may be unintentionally putting upon them as well, because we sometimes forget about that emotional intelligence piece. So we could be unintentionally contributing to the unrealistic perfectionism, the stress and anxiety, and some of those time management skills. So it's important to kind of take a look at the systems that are in place, and are those systems truly helping, or may there be some harm in the systems that we have set up for our high ability learners? Just because we want to kind of always be mindful of how our systems impact the social and emotional wellness of all students as a whole. But I just wanted to note kind of those factors that are really specific to high ability learners as well. So responsible decision making is based in the choices we make and how those choices impact others. How do we consider our options? What are those consequences of those choices that on not only me, but the people around me? And how do we make those decisions accordingly? It's beyond personal decision making and looking at really collective responsibility as a whole as well. Relationship skills and our relationships with others is a critical piece to SEBL, both in the youth realm and in the adult realm. Our relationships with other people is extremely important, and it's particularly important when we think about high ability learners. The ability to establish and maintain healthy relationships with our peers is critical, but we know that sometimes, in some cases, not all, some high ability learners may struggle with those peer interactions. They may prefer adult interactions. They have a preference for adult relationships or communicating with their teacher or other adults in the building, and thus isolate themselves from peers. So really this intentional fostering of social peer relationships is highly important as we look to develop this competency. And this also includes communication and conflict resolution skills as well. Again, social awareness is really moving beyond those initial relationship building skills, but into an area where we have empathy for others, where we can take the perspective of other people, where we can see how what we're doing impacts how other people feel. And we can put ourselves in someone else's shoes. This really also expands into fostering a respect for diversity as well.
So if we think back to the characteristics of those high ability learners, and when we think about HAL students, and we can see how these foundational kind of social and emotional behavior skills are critical to the success of all students, but in this conversation in particular, we're going to be thinking about HAL students. So when we think about HAL students, often exhibiting behaviors such as that emotional sensitivity or impatience with peers or that perfectionism, they often, again, have a preference for adults over children. And so when we see all these things come together, how can we use that SEBL and those competencies to help those students within the school day?
So we're really going to tie it all together. Sorry, Sheyanne, did I cut you off?
Sorry, I was going to pause just for a second. I know we've been giving you guys a lot of information, and I just wanted to pause for a second if anybody had been holding on to any questions.
Great idea. You can feel free to drop those in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute yourself as well.
This wasn't in the chat, but I wonder if I could ask it. This is the first time I've heard behavior added into SEL. Is this something that is newer, something we should have known already, and I'm just late on the uptake here?
No, so this is newer. This is really as our Nebraska MTSS team has really worked to build out these social, emotional, and behavioral modules. We've been working on, we have 4 days of systems training and really looks at building your MTSS system. And then beyond that, we are developing some social, emotional, and behavioral modules that looks at developing that and tying that into your MTSS system. So as we looked at it, we kept thinking that these 2 elements kind of operate in silos often in our school buildings and in our systems. And we really didn't want it to be that way. They're all interconnected and they're foundational for each other. So kids have to have those emotion regulation skills to be able to make appropriate behavior choices in the classroom. So we didn't want it to be as though you take a separate behavior training and then you go to your SEL training. We wanted to look at them as a system-wide whole child perspective and really talk about them in that way. It's new-ish, I would say. Over the summer, we really started putting our heads together, and as we had individuals on this work group from both SEL, behavior, mental health, all different backgrounds, we just decided that it makes more sense to tackle it from SEBL as a whole and a whole child approach.
Good question.
All right. So then I think we'll kind of step into tying it all together under that MTSS umbrella, under that MTSS framework. So we're going to go through a little bit of some brief overview of the MTSS essential elements and kind of see how this all fits in. So these are the essential elements of a multi-tiered system of support. These are the essential elements that we focus on at Nebraska MTSS. And really your SEBL should occur within that MTSS framework focused on these elements. I think often, just as we've talked about how it's easy to not to forget about the emotional intelligence and the emotional development of our high ability students, it's also easy to not focus on problem solving with our high ability learners as well. And so we really want to make sure we're using that system of problem solving, that database problem solving and decision making as we look at providing these supports that we'll talk about later on for our students. So we have shared leadership is one of the essential elements. If you could just back up one slide, sorry.
I'm sorry.
No, I got ahead of myself and now I'm backing up. That's on me. So we have shared leadership. We want to make sure that we have all the individuals at the table. So if you're having a problem solving meeting on a kiddo and they are a high ability learner, your HAL teacher should be a part of those problem solving meetings. We want to make sure that we have that shared leadership and that we have everyone at the table who has insights about those students. Communication, collaboration, and partnerships, again, partnering with all those involved, making sure that they have a seat at the table, and really those family partnerships as well. So we're going to talk later about some importance of family partnerships, but making sure that families are a part of this process, this MTSS process as well. Making sure that really those strategies that you're using to support students are evidence-based, that your core curriculum are evidence-based, and that your intervention and assessment are evidence-based practices. You have to have the capacity and infrastructure to implement these systems, as we'll talk later on about different core and targeted and intensive strategies. You have to have the infrastructure in place to implement those layered continuums of support. And again, just really using that data and a model for problem solving to make those decisions. So we use a tiered systematic approach for MTSS as a whole, but also with SEBL, and this includes our high ability learners, looking at what is needed for all, some, and a few students. This must be based on data and again, identified within a system of problem solving. As we look at the data of our high ability learners, we first really have to ensure that they have a strong access to core SEBL instruction. So is there a core social, emotional, behavioral instruction for all students, and do they have access to that before we can really identify those students who may need additional support? And is that being implemented with fidelity? So are those core, that core instruction, is it being implemented well and with fidelity, and do those students have access to that? So when we think about the all, some, few system of MTSS, we really want to share this visual. This is a visual that we use often in Nebraska MTSS, which explains how all students must have access to, in this case, core SEBL instruction with specially designed instruction at increasing intensity to support the needs of students. So high ability learners may have unmet needs in the area of SEBL, just like all students. Any student may have unmet needs. And as we particularly, I'm going to keep referencing back to that asynchronous development because I think it particularly applies, and the risk for mental health concerns. And then also that possibly need for more challenging material. We want to make sure that as their need increases, the instruction and intervention is specially designed to meet their needs, just as we would do with academic rigor. So in order to identify those students who may be in need of SEBL support, we have to use the data to make those decisions. It's just like we don't say that, Johnny's smart, so he should be in HAL. We don't say that, so we don't want to say so-and-so is naughty or can't handle their emotions, so they need more intensive supports. We have to use a system of data and a system of problem solving to make these decisions. Obviously, perceptual data and observation and input is very important, but we want to have lots of different kinds of data to make these decisions. So the image on the right is the Nebraska MTSS problem solving model. Your district may use this. You may have seen it before. You may use a different model, or you may have a model that's specific to your district. Maybe it has your mascot in the center. If you've ever come to any of our MTSS trainings, you probably created one with your mascot or your school name in the center. Whatever model you use, it's just important that we use a system in making decisions for how to support SEBL needs of our students, just as we would for all students and just as we would for academics. So we identify what's occurring, define the problem, analyze the data using various data sources. We implement a plan to provide support, making sure they have access to a strong core first, and then reflect back on that plan again, using that data to evaluate how the plan went.
So as we think about this SEL supportive kind of instructional, or this pyramid model of kind of increasing intervention, I have this really awesome model that's one of my favorites. The pyramid model in front of you is adapted from, or is the model of Doctors Tim and Tamara Stambaugh from Vanderbilt University. And they do a really awesome job about, this is a research-based model that they used, and it is how do we use school-based interventions instead of just immediately sending these children to counseling, which Dr. Tim Stambaugh does see primarily gifted students in his practice, and so he sees a lot of them come through the door and kind of suggest these school-based interventions first. So at the very bottom, which is what we would kind of consider within the core, is how can we raise awareness and kind of acceptance of their giftedness. So first and foremost, how do we help them accept their identity? How do we accept family and teachers? Kind of work with them to create a realistic picture of self and all those kind of different things. And then at that core level, we want to also make sure that they're being properly accommodated in the academic realm. So are they being met with appropriate curriculum? Are they with likability peers? So in those realms, it's how do we mitigate behavioral issues by making sure the students aren't bored or that they're being appropriately challenged. So if you have the appropriately challenging curriculum and you've discussed with the student about giftedness and all those kinds of things, and they're still kind of exhibiting some symptoms of possible behavioral issues or mental health concerns, we can move up to more targeted interventions, such as like kind of meeting with either the HAL teacher or maybe a guidance counselor and working targeted on those study skills if they're feeling overwhelmed or anxious with their perfectionism, or working on organizational management skills is a really big one here, and working on those unrealistic thoughts and cognitive distortions that may be occurring in relation to school. And then if we are still seeing some of those behaviors or that lean towards having a mental health disorder, that's when we have tried what we can at the school level and going on for individual counseling or seeing a clinical psychiatrist or something like that may be in the picture if these students are being accommodated at school and they're still experiencing some of these emotional issues.
One thing just to note, and we're going to talk about it a little bit here as we go on. So this is a model. That model that she just showed is an excellent model by Stamba, I think she said.
Yes, Stamba.
I'm not as familiar. She's definitely taught me a lot about the HAL, but it's an awesome model. But we want to note that we're going to talk a little bit about the different tiers from an MTSS framework as well, because we do want to note that tier 3, there are a lot more strategies that we can also include into tier 3, and that those individual counseling, or if a caregiver should choose to seek outside services, those definitely could be a part of the information that we use for problem solving and to support the student. But we want to let you know that we also have a wealth of strategies at the tier 3 level that are just more intensified supports that would be available to provide for students that you might see as tier 3.
Yes,
And
thank
also,
you, Lindsee.
yeah, for sure. And also just to note that tier 3 doesn't always have to be any sort of diagnosis or anything like that. Obviously, we've talked a lot today about mental health concerns and mental health risks, but these might just be behaviors or emotional considerations that students are exhibiting that we feel like aren't being met with our core, with access to the core. They might not be able to be met within a small group setting. So then we move on to that more individualized, intensified supports. So it doesn't have to be a diagnosis or anything like that. And we're not in schools, we're not in the business, obviously, of diagnosing students with mental health disorders. So we just want to make that known too, that this is really just about supporting the unique needs of students, and that we'll share some different strategies. We wanted to share this model because it's an awesome model as well, but we have some different specific strategies that you guys can provide at the tier 3 level as well. But those will be in a minute or two.
Yeah, absolutely. This model was created by a mental health practitioner, and instead of altering it, we just wanted to show it to you guys and then give you our own strategies.
Yes, definitely. So when we think about our system for SEBL, again, we are just going to really keep driving home that need for SEBL to be within your MTSS system, and that for it to fall through all of your steps, just like you do with academics. So we have to have a way to screen for SEBL needs. So you want to adopt a tool that you'll include with your balanced assessment plan. You want to establish and teach expectations that foster a positive, inclusive climate. Select and implement an evidence-based core SEBL curriculum to meet the needs of all students. There are lots of curriculum out there. I do want to note here, this is a good place to plug. On our NeMTSS website, we have a program comparison chart. And if you'll go to the NeMTSS website, or I can show that later on if we have time at the end, we have a program comparison chart there that really explores different programs, and there is a specific category for SEBL. And it looks at the various programs. It will show you what evidence there is to support them, and then the research behind them as well. So I know that a lot of schools use Second Step, But there are a lot of other programs out there as well. And so we want to have that information available to you. So Nebraska MTSS has that on the website. If you have a program or you're interested in a program, I was just learning about a new program the other day, and it's not on our program comparison chart. We have an area there where you can submit a program. And our research team at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln will do all the research for you. So it's a pretty exceptional tool that if you're interested in anything, you stumble across it online or in a training or something, and you can't find it on our program comparison chart, we certainly want to have that. So if you'll submit it, we'll do the research. And then usually the first of the month, they add new programs. So the next month or so, it will be on the program comparison chart, and you'll be able to find information about the program you submitted. So that's a really important tool I want to make known, because I know that people are always wanting to expand their options to make sure they have SEBL curriculum at all levels for our early childhood through high school, through secondary. So again, we want to make sure we embed SEBL curriculum objectives and competencies within other aspects of the day whenever possible. We really want to integrate that into all of our school life. So we're going to integrate that SEBL curriculum objectives and competencies into our academic instruction and give opportunities within our academics to practice those SEBL skills. So we're going to give opportunities to work with peers, opportunities to resolve conflicts, we're going to talk about emotion regulation, really find ways to really pull that in to our academic as well, so that they're really interwoven all throughout your day. You're going to utilize this district and school problem solving model to meet the needs of all, some and few, like we've discussed, and create decision rules based on SEBL data to provide targeted and intensive support. Again, we don't want to just make decisions based on what we think, or get around a table and kind of decide things on a whim. We want to have decision rules, and we want to have our decisions based on data for behavior and social emotional needs of students, just like we wouldn't make decisions on academics without data to support those decisions. So I really just want to drive that home. I know I probably said it enough times to be obnoxious, but we want to make sure that we're using data and that we have decision rules to decide how to support our students who have social, emotional, and behavior needs, just like we do academics. And then we also want to utilize progress monitoring in the same way. We want to have a progress monitoring way to see if what we're doing is working. We don't want to plug students into supports and have them remain in supports indefinitely without ever checking back to see if it's working, if we need to tweak, do we need to make changes, how can we continue to support those needs of the students. So it's not a one and done and then never check back again, just like it's not with academics. So we really want to shift that thinking to start thinking about social emotional behavior learning in the same way.
Adam, I saw the chat flashing. Did we have a couple of questions?
We did have a couple of them. One asked for the program comparison tool, and it was provided by Heidi. The second one was from Stacy Vogel. Do you feel Second Step serves gifted students well? And I was wondering if that was tier 2 on the framework, or the second step of establish and teach skills and expectations on slide 29. So I'm not sure which one she was asking about.
I'm guessing.
I was starting to answer you.
Okay, yeah.
She had just mentioned in talking about the program comparison tool that many Nebraska schools chose to use Second Step as their tool, and that there were comparisons for many others. And I just wondered if you felt that in establishing the climate expectations and inclusivity and those sorts of things, if Second Step would be what you would suggest for students who have gifted needs.
You know, I have to be honest, I don't think I can make a suggestion on that. I think that could be something that we could have our university research team look into, kind of looking at it from a lens of the research for gifted students, because I want to kind of link back to not sharing things unless I have the data to support it. I think Second Step is a great program for SEBL as a whole. It's a great core program. It can be used in small groups, targeted. So I think it kind of depends on the specific needs of the students, and how you can match that curriculum to meet the needs of the students. In terms of whether or not it's meant to be used for gifted students, I think that's where I would not feel comfortable saying whether or not it's researched for gifted students or to be used in small groups or individualized with gifted students. But I do think it's a great tool for a core curriculum, and can be used really well, really nicely done in small groups, and in an individual intensified way as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, some of the strategies we're about to talk about too, especially in the core realm, are strategies you can use in addition to whatever SEBL curriculum you're currently using. So if your school district is using Second Step and you have a gifted student who has a specific need, you can go back to this chart and say, oh, like here's a strategy to add to the SEBL that we're already doing that's specific to a gifted need. And so hopefully some of these things that are supplemental will be helpful in that way instead of going out and finding a brand new curriculum just for gifted students.
Great idea. And I think half the battle is having a core curriculum. I mean, we really talk, endlessly about the need for all students to have access to that core, and that being like your first question. So if you have Second Step and you can build upon Second Step, I think that's excellent, and find ways to make it meet the needs of your unique students.
Also, Lindsay, how do they submit to the research team if they have a resource?
For the program comparison type. So how about at the end, I'm going to show some resources, and I'm going to show a few things on the website anyway. So I can share my screen at that time, and just kind of quickly show you where to submit for the program comparison chart.
Awesome, thank you. So now we're going to get into some of those strategies that we have been talking about, and we've kind of organized them in a really cool way. We've organized them by, on the side is what tier they belong in, and then they're organized by CASEL competencies. And so the first thing to really note when we think about those core SEBL strategies is that students are being met with that appropriate curriculum match. It is really hard to tease out whether they have an SEBL need or if they're not being met. Their needs are not being met academically if you don't know for sure you're meeting their needs academically. So if they are displaying that SEBL need and they don't have their needs being met academically, that's the first thing to try, because in a lot of cases that can mitigate some of the behavioral needs, is putting them in that appropriate environment where they're stimulated and they're not perceiving themselves as bored. So if we think about HAL services, again, in these competencies, we can see that within the competencies, we have a lot of really great tools. So under that self-awareness, in that pyramid that we showed a while ago, is that how do we understand and value giftedness as a characteristic of yourself? What does it mean to be gifted and what does it not mean? And how do we keep them from defining themselves by giftedness? Because a lot of times that can come in and eat them whole, especially if they value themselves as they value performance. And so that self-awareness piece of who I am in addition to being gifted. For self-management, we really want to focus on valuing the process over the product, and this will really help mitigate some of those neurotic perfectionistic tendencies. Instead of valuing the grade at the end, how did you get there and how hard did you work? A really important thing that teachers do for all students is exemplifying those appropriate regulation of emotions, especially when they make a mistake. Gifted students tend to get really upset when they make a mistake or if they feel like they're not doing well enough. So it's really important to exemplify what that might look like when a mistake is made, and start early promoting those organizational and study skills. We know, especially when those students get to high school, their executive functioning skills are not quite as strong because either they've never had to study or they don't already have an organizational system in place because middle school is easy. And so they become really flustered and upset. Responsible decision-making is also super important. Gifted kids, especially at the younger ages, you can probably think of a few in your classroom that act impulsively. both academic and behaviorally. So either they finish everything really quickly and make silly mistakes, or behaviorally they blurt things out that are not appropriate and all those different kinds of things. And so making sure that they understand consequences for actions at the very base level is important. For relationship skills, this is something that has been hotly debated for a long time. Acceleration is widely been stereotyped as damaging to the psychosocial development of gifted students because they are younger than those around them. But all of the research, and especially the research in a really great book called A Nation Deceived, note that gifted students that interact with their cognitive age peers instead of their chronological age peers often see advancement in their personal maturity. And there was a study done by Karen Rogers that found that gifted students who were accelerated in a subject of talent made an extra 3/5 a year of growth in that accelerated subject. And they, every time when they've studied the effects both emotionally and academically on gifted students, they have found significant effect size. If you think about research, 0.3 is a really significant effect size, and for gifted students with acceleration, the effect size of most studies are somewhere around the 0.57. So acceleration is a really, really great tool to help students build relationships so that they feel as though they are with those students who understand them, or they're able to make friends. Additionally, sometimes because of that intellectual ability, they are not very tolerant of others who kind of learn differently or don't think as fast as they do. And so creating that social awareness and having those conversations in the classroom where students are able to learn that people are different, not only diverse backgrounds, but also diverse in their thinking and abilities. That's really important to discuss with gifted students. So as we move up, for those who are displaying the need for more targeted interventions, we move into tier 2. So with self-awareness, one of the really great activities in a book that I'm going to talk to you guys about is called a feel-good folder. And what happens is the gifted student keeps a folder or a log of things that they're really proud of that they've done. And when they get a bad grade or they're beating themselves up over a mistake because of their perfectionism, it's a really good tool to be able to pull out their feel-good folder and show them all the success that they've had previously and all the success that they're going to have in the future, regardless of what grade they got on this assignment. Something that's really good for all students in this tier, but gifted students especially, for those who are have an overexcitability that's psychomotor related, having that flexible seating. And a lot of times I taught gifted, and just even pacing in the back of the classroom would help a kid think, or if you've got a pencil tapper, just giving them something to fidget with. And then teaching the students how to recognize cognitive distortions. So when are they thinking things worse than they are, or when are they perceiving things to be different than reality in a way that's negative towards themselves, and refuting those kind of perfectionistic thoughts. So teaching them how to recognize cognitive distortions and refute them is really important in that self-awareness piece. And then if we go towards self-management, another really important one is practicing realistic goal setting. Not only is this important for students who suffer from neurotic perfectionism, so that they are always setting realistic goals instead of a moving target, it's also good for students who are underachieving, so that they have a realistic goal and they can see progress towards success. Evaluating appropriate risk-taking is also important. Again, on both sides of the spectrum, students who are perfectionistic, a lot of times they're afraid to take risks because if it's not perfect, they won't do it at all. And then students who are underachieving won't take risks simply because they don't want to do it, or they're bored, or all those different things. So evaluating what an appropriate risk is really important, and modeling that either yourself, or something that's really great for gifted students is modeling things within stories. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later when I have some recommendations for curriculum. And then for those students who weren't quite able to get themselves together, doing that targeted intervention on those organizational and study skills, and helping them come up with that system, keeping them accountable for that, and teaching them really how to study individually. Again, responsible decision-making can be modeled, especially when it comes to handling mistakes or reactions to those around them, or making decisions, being able to model what is an appropriate response will help them internalize and understand how they should respond in the future. Guiding student behavior is really important so that they can work cooperatively in a group, because we know gifted students a lot of times like to work on their own. So modeling that can help them work in a group. Being able to communicate multiple perspectives so that they don't just see that their perspective is right and just have a hard time making friends. And then possibly those guided interactions with peers if they have a hard time getting out of their shell and meeting people. And for social awareness, practicing interpreting feedback from others is really important because of those cognitive distortions. Gifted students may see themselves as better or worse than they actually are emotionally. And so practicing interpreting feedback from others and getting a realistic sense of self is super important. And then practicing using verbal and nonverbal cues for behavior, modifying behavior. And finally, for those tier 3 strategies, we have support for students who are needing to meet regularly to discuss self-image, realistic self-image, discuss their progress so that they can see that they are moving forward. Think of replacement strategies to refute those cognitive distortions. Those targeted interventions for view of self, such as making a balanced list of strengths and weaknesses and interpreting extreme views that they have of themselves. Individualized supports through addressing possible mental health and behavioral, which we discussed is not a school job, but maybe a job for a counselor. When I was doing the responsible decision making, I read a story about a gifted student who was in high school, and he did not go to his high school graduation because he refused to wear the tie that his mother picked out. And so the whole family went to the graduation, but he didn't go at all. And so the strategy from that story came the discussion of how to appropriately pick battles and look at the positives and negatives of situations before you make a decision, and being able to negotiate a point. For those students who are still struggling with decision making and risk taking, doing some role playing scenarios that they're faced with a choice. For relationships, they may require some kind of mentorship or individual assistance processing what they call interpersonal distance, which can be when a gifted student tries to take on too much burden from what's going on in the world around them. Role-playing appropriate interactions is also really important because, again, some of the students who are really high intellectually but don't have quite the emotional intelligence, they may have problems saying and talking to others, and so having those role-playing is important. And then one-on-one social skills practice and reading stories to model different things such as perception of truth and all those fun things. So those are all strategies that can be used in addition to your SEBL curriculum that you're already using.
And quickly, we just want to make sure that all of these are determined, and I know I've said it before, but it really are determined through a problem-solving
Yes.
process. That we use the problem-solving process to make sure we're meeting the needs of students. And again, in tier 2, it can look like small group, and in tier 3, it's usually a more individualized, intensified support. And these can be from a school-based practitioner, from someone on the problem-solving team, or like we said, if a caregiver should choose to pursue outside services, they can also make that choice as well. But that's where those family partnerships are really key, because if a caregiver would choose to seek outside consultation at the tier 3 level or at any time in a child's life, having those partnerships with families so that we can have that information to help develop strategies for all students, for our students, through that problem solving process is really key. So just making sure that we have those family partnerships as well. And I know it's 3 o'clock, we're running out of time here, so we're going to really hurry quickly through these last few slides if you can hang on. Otherwise, we'll put the slides in the chat as well.
So really quickly, these are some really great books that I highly recommend. So the first one is When Gifted Kids Don't Have All the Answers, and it has chapters of strategies to use in the classroom for those specific social emotional needs of gifted students. Same thing with Teaching Tenacity. It is also a strategy-based book, which is really great. And then my personal favorite is the Affective Jacob's Ladders, because they are pairing literacy with the affective needs. And so it's an actual framework, and there are 6 different ladders, and they all have different social emotional competencies and how to build them through already chosen stories and videos and different texts in the book. and it provides you a framework to do it in whatever you're reading in class, which is really, really awesome. So they have those for the younger grades and all the way through 8th grade, but I highly recommend those Jacobs ladders.
Just a few resources on our website is the Launch Nebraska. The Launch Nebraska had a summer SEL series that you can go back and view, those recorded series. And then Nebraska MTSS had a virtual summit. We usually have a summit every year, but we had a virtual summit, and all of those sessions were based on SEBL as well. Those are available on our website. I know someone wanted to know how to get to the program comparison chart. So I'm going to share my screen really quick. And hopefully, let's see, did I share the wrong screen? I'm going to share my screen really quickly to just show how to get there. So are you seeing our website?
Yes.
Okay. So this is just the Nebraska MTSS website. Down here, you can find the Launch Nebraska and the summit that we just talked about, where you can click on those virtual series. But if you're interested in our programs comparison chart, so you're going to go to resources, you're going to click on the program comparison tool. And this is where you'll find the tool itself. So you can click on the tool here and explore that. There's academic and SEBL. But if you'd like to submit a program, you're going to submit a program request right here. So you'll click this button and you'll be able to fill that in there in terms of new programs if you don't see them on there. But I would definitely encourage you to check out that program comparison tool as well. And I can go ahead. So we'll just, this is how we serve the regions with regional support for Nebraska MTSS. If anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat and we will stay on as long as we need to answer those questions.
Thank you guys so much for coming and making this first one super great. And I hope to see you at future sessions.
Let's see. Do we have any questions in the chat? I'll just hang on. I can't see the chat now that I'm screen sharing, but.
No, you're okay. Lots of questions for, wanting the slides. So we put the slides in there a couple times, and then lots of thank yous and saying it was a great presentation.
Great.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming to listen.
And we're happy. Reach out if you have any questions. I know we were
Please.
kind of rushing there at the end, but if anybody has any questions about specific resources, definitely Sheyanne has a ton of resources available. And if you are interested in kind of collaborating on building the system, definitely let us know.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry. So you shared the slides, but it's not going into my drive. Am I doing something wrong?
When you click on it, does it open a window with the slides in it?
Yes. Does that automatically go into my drive? I'm a little bit.
No, that's okay. Look along the top where it says HAL, MTSS, SEL presentation, and then there to the right of that is a star, and to the right of that is add shortcut to drive.
Oh.
You click on add shortcut to drive, it will put it in your drive, and it will also let you decide kind of exactly where it goes in there.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No problem.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
And there was a question about the recording that you recorded this, and if you're going to post it anywhere or
Yes.
share it.
Yeah, so I'm going to post the recording on the HAL and SEL webinar website. And what I'll do is everybody who attended the session or everybody who was registered for the session will get a link automatically. I'll also put it on Twitter and send it out to my listserv. So there should be several ways to access the recording.
It's going to be hard to miss.
I'm guessing it'll be on the Nebraska MTSS website as well and our social media as well too. So you might get bombarded with it.
Yeah, you won't miss it.
All right. Well, about everyone else that is left is pictureless. Sometimes those are ones that needed to step away from their computer maybe at the end.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, so much.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. And
That
I
was
was thinking,
great.
Yeah,
you.
Thank
it was
you.
really good. And maybe this is something that we could look at for my HAL partnership meeting. You know, I have a couple of those a year. I've got one coming up in November, though I think Sheyanne, identification and Rule 3 might be a little more pressing, but I've got another one at the end of the year that this might be a good fit for if we can
Yeah, I'd
find
love that.
Awesome.
That'd be great.
maybe some activity to do with it. You know, since we've got the information out now, maybe there's something that we could do that would be building the framework or something.
Awesome.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Let's talk.
Okay, we could talk later about this, but
Sounds good.
Thank you, Adam.
all
Yeah.
right, I'm gonna take off, guys.
All
All right.
right. Thank you. Bye. Okay, let's see. Do we end it? Can we end it? I'm very good at. We got 12 people left. Go ahead and stop the recording.
Oh yeah.